Look, we're not alarmist on this program, but we do say things as they are. With undeniable Chinese expansionism in our region, significant instability in Europe, and appalling leadership amongst the democracies, national security is going to be a big issue for us. We have to avoid the posturing and face reality. You will recall I spoke to Greg Sheridan last month. He writes with great clarity about the issue of national security. The first point that I've made for years is that you cannot have national security without economic security. And that's why running up $1 trillion of debt is shameful and unforgivable. Greg Sheridan wrote earlier this year, and I quote, "The Russian invasion of Ukraine is the most powerful, shocking wake-up call to Western strategic complacency since the end of the Vietnam War," unquote. He went on, "Australia, despite the lofty rhetoric, shows no signs of taking this historic wake-up call seriously," unquote. And then this, quote, "Of all the nations in the Western Alliance, we are long-term amongst the most vulnerable and the least prepared," unquote. He wrote ominously, quote, "The Australian Defence Force is almost insanely structured to meet none of our strategic needs. And, quote, not one of our services, Navy, Air Force or Army, has any strategic strike power. Every one of our defence programs is in disarray or scheduled to deliver capability so far into the future that it's in the realm of science fiction." He wrote, and I quote, "Canberra spends nearly 600 billion, B for billion, and produces neither a warship nor a missile cell." And to the President, Greg Sheridan wrote last month, "The sighting of the China-Solomon Islands Security Treaty is a very bad day for Australia. One of the worst days for our national security since the end of the Vietnam War." He said, "There's no doubt this is an epic failure of Australian policy," unquote. So while we face an energy crisis undermining our economic strength, where is a sensible debate about national security that isn't full of rhetoric and platitudes? We hear a word or two from time to time about submarines, yet the submarine acquisition process is a complete shambles, and the chance of getting anything significant from it is remote. Tony Abbott talked about leasing submarines, but there seems to be a disposition in Canberra to make them all in Adelaide. We'll see nothing for 20 or 30 years. Greg Sheridan again put it splendidly when he argued, quote, "In the history of human habitation of this continent, nothing remotely comparable in complexity to building a nuclear submarine has ever been attempted." He said, "No living Australian Prime Minister has commissioned a submarine that actually got built," unquote. We'll enter into this debate the University of Melbourne's Deputy Vice-Chancellor International, Professor Michael Wesley, who today is arguing that Australia is, quote, "dangerously unprepared for future threats, thanks to bungled defence procurement, run-down foreign policy and diplomatic capability, and the weaponising of national security for political purposes," unquote. That about sums it up. Professor Wesley, who I might add was born in India, came here with his parents at 4, grew up in Nambour in Queensland and went to the Nambour State High School. So well done, sir. But he said that he's, quote, "really worried about the situation confronting Australia during a time of growing strategic competition and uncertainty," unquote. Now consider this. The Australian government is not talking to the leadership of the government in China. We've seen squabbling over fighter planes from China and Australia in the South China Sea early this month. Beijing's deal with the Solomon Islands, which would allow China to send troops into the island nation, and China rallying other Pacific Island nations to sign further security deals. Well, Professor Wesley concedes that the new Defence Minister, Richard Marles, meeting with his Chinese counterpart was a good start. But there would never be, he said, a return to the warmth the two countries, Australia and China, once shared. Professor Wesley said disturbingly, quote, "There's simply too much water under the bridge now." And in the most simple warning that could be given, Professor Wesley, who leads the University of Melbourne's international engagement, said he remained concerned about Australia's readiness to deal with future threats. Well, it echoes the discussion I had earlier this year with Greg Sheridan, who argued on this program, quote, "For the past 15 years, defence policy has been characterised by epic announcements and dismal failure to deliver." Unquote. Question: will this change under an Albanese government? Tell me what you think. Email me, alanjones@adh.tv.